freedom of speech,
fundamental rights,
freedom of conscience,
academic freedom,
freedom of press,
and the right to listen.
You're listening to So to Speak, the free speech podcast, brought to you by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education.
Well, welcome back to the show. This is actually our first time, as promised in the last episode, our first time talking about what's happening on campus. We started out with Jonathan Rausch, of course, and moved on to Glenn Greenwald and David Ball, and we touched on campus subjects during those episodes. But classes are ending on campus. The last disinvitation attempt probably or hopefully has been made. So I'm sitting here today with Greg Lukianoff, President and CEO of FIRE. You have all met him before, hopefully, on our first episode. And Samantha Harris. She is Director of Policy Research here at FIRE and actually the person in the introduction who says the right to listen. So her voice should sound familiar. Sam, Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about this 2015-2016 school year.
Yeah.
Headline grabbing.
Yeah.
I don't know that we were so much expecting the students behaving badly angle that a lot of the press like to jump on. But
yeah.
Greg, you came out with an article, cover story for The Atlantic at the beginning of the school year that was prescient by all standards. I mean, it predicted a lot of the things that we had seen.
Yeah, unfortunately. The thing that I keep on explaining, and one of the reasons why I think it's great that you're talking to both me and Sam, is that me and Sam have been with FIRE for a really long time. Yeah. And we've seen...
Yeah, when did you start at FIRE, Greg?
October 2nd, 2001.
Yeah, and you were early on, too.
I was May 2005.
Yeah.
Although I also was here for a couple of months during law school as a legal intern.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, when I first came to look for apartments in Philadelphia, it was I landed at Philadelphia International Airport at 9:10 a.m. on 9/11. So that's a story all to itself.
So you were in the air during 9/11?
Yeah, I was in the air during 9/11.
Wow.
I got stuck in Philadelphia because they shut down flights, all over the country for several days. It's really weird to look in the sky and see no planes for days in a row.
Uh-huh. Wow, that's incredible. 9/11, actually, to go on a bit of a digression here,
Sure.
the environment on campus was different after 9/11, right?
Sure.
It was one of the big periods, a lot of challenges for free speech on campus right after 9/11.
Well, what's interesting is that, I think that 9/11 had the surprising effect of reminding professors that they can get in trouble for what they say too. And the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we had a lot of cases. Some of them were people saying, let's get those terrorists, and some people were saying things unpatriotic. The first letter I wrote was on behalf of Richard Berthold, who joked.
What school was he at?
At the University of New Mexico,
okay.
where he said, anybody can blow up the Pentagon as my vote.
Uh-huh.
Not a very sensitive thing to say, but this is a professor known for being
bombastic.
A little bombastic, a little snarky.
Uh-huh.
And he immediately apologized, but he refused to fight out his case in public, and 6 months later he was out of a job. And I remember talking to him on the phone saying, listen, if you don't fight this out in public, you're never going to keep your job. And unfortunately, we ended up being right on that. But in other cases, it was people putting up, I think at Central Michigan University, it was students putting up signs saying, get the bastards. That was actually the cover, I believe, of the San Francisco Chronicle, believe it or not. It said, the bastards and American flags. And they were told to take them down because that might be construed as offensive to other students. I assume pro-terrorism students, I guess. But it was a very interesting time to sort of cut your teeth on free speech issues when everybody was terrified and angry, but all in different directions.
Yeah. And, throughout the 2000s, FIRE, and Greg, I know you've talked about this a lot in some of the presentations you've done, FIRE's main challenge on campus was convincing the administrators, right, that free speech matters. Sam, when did we start the speech code report?
2006 was our first one, yeah.
Yeah, and we had 75% of schools maintain red light speech codes, right?
Right, yeah.
And we're getting down. What are we at this year?
This year it was below 50% for the first time.
Uh-huh.
As you're noting, there's been a shift. I mean, it's not to say that it's not sometimes still difficult to convince administrators about the importance of free speech, and particularly with some of the pressure we're seeing from the federal government. Uh-huh. In some areas it's become very, very difficult. But I feel like one of the biggest changes I've seen in my years at FIRE has been this shift from what I call kind of like a top-down censorship to the calls for censorship coming from students themselves.
Yeah.
And actually, it's interesting that you mentioned the 9/11 situation with faculty, because I do remember reading some of those cases. But then in the interim, for many of my years at FIRE, I feel like the primary people we were helping with censorship, although there were always faculty cases, were students. And now I feel like with this latest round of student-driven censorship, it's really landed squarely on the doorstep of faculty, and in a way that really affects their classroom speech. Like, I feel like in my first years here, when we got a faculty case, it was usually a faculty member who had said something outside the classroom that people were outraged about and, calling for their head over. Now I feel like the faculty cases we're getting tend to be more related to their classroom speech, which, when you think about the primary purpose of a university as to educate students, the idea that faculty are increasingly finding themselves in trouble over germane classroom discussions is particularly, I think, distressing. And that's been a trend I've noticed in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm looking at our 10 worst colleges for free speech in 2016 list that Greg every year publishes on the Huffington Post on behalf of FIRE. The first school on here, and it's not a ranked list, but is Mount St. Mary's University.
Sure.
The second one is Northwestern University, where Professor Laura Kiplis famously, at the end of the 2014 and 15 school year, was brought up on Title IX charges. So there was a Title IX investigation into her essay that she published for the Chronicle of Higher Education. Then on here we've also got Louisiana State University, where FIRE sponsored a lawsuit on behalf of a faculty member who was fired there for her pedagogical techniques. What's happening?
Yeah, we've just seen a lot more cases of faculty members' jobs being threatened for what they say. And in many cases, those are tenured faculty members, people who used to think they were untouchable when it came to freedom of speech. So I'd say
Teresa
that
Buchanan,
was
Laura Kipnis, yeah.
Laura Kipnis.
One of the professors in the Mount St. Mary's case.
Well, and the Marquette case as
Yeah.
well. Professor McAdams.
Yeah.
There are all situations where tenure was not good enough of protection. So I've noticed the same trend that Sam has. That for most of our career, that we were trying to explain to people that administrators were the ones who were sort of running out of control, and sometimes it was ideological. In some cases, it was don't criticize the parking program at this school, don't criticize our brand. Something very sometimes it could be downright corporate. The second phase that I always identify, which is also pretty recent, was a much more aggressive Department of Education. That really took up a lot of our time, I'd say, starting in around 2010, 2011, really 2011.
Yeah, I characterize my time at FIRE as before April 4th, 2011, and after April 4th, 2011.
What happened on April 4th?
The Department of Education issued a Dear Colleague letter about Title IX. And while that particular Dear Colleague letter concerned due process issues, it sort of marked the beginning of an era of really aggressive sort of micromanagement of colleges' handling of Title IX, which includes sexual assault and sexual harassment, which often includes a verbal component.
Yeah.
And so that just, I think, really changed the landscape in a lot of ways. And there have been developments since 2011.
The 2013 blueprint, for example, and just the pressure that a lot of these colleges and universities are facing from the federal government to investigate, some things, like an essay that a professor writes in a national publication, Laura Kipnis. But, do you think, Greg, that this we'll get back to the different stages here, but do you think that this faculty angle, this angle where faculty members are increasingly under threat from administrations, is being overlooked a bit?
I think it is, but I was just at a conference a couple actually days ago, and there was a university president there who will remain unnamed, but who was being very dismissive as to the whole issue of restricted speech on campus, and someone else there who was trying to say nothing to see here. It's basically just journalists run amok, trying to chase an interesting story about all these sexy cases. And I had so many responses to it, not the least of which is, we've been doing this since 1999. Our cases are almost never, quote-unquote, headline cases. And I feel like we've been sort of toiling in obscurity to a large degree, at least for most people are concerned, when it comes to these really ridiculous abuses of power. And the journalists who have been covering how bad it's gotten in recent years are not exactly lightweight. Well, you have Jonathan Chait, sort of opened the door by talking about the problem of PC and the way we communicate. Emily Yaffe, talking about it. But the final point I wanted to make is, and professor after professor is coming forward, and even at very prestigious schools saying, yeah, this has reached a ridiculous point. I feel like I can't, as Jeannie Suk made the point of many of her and her colleagues, that she's afraid to talk about sexual assault in her criminal law class because students will object to it. And to me, the thought of a generation of lawyers not learning the law related to sexual assault, of course, is most dangerous to people who are victims of sexual assault. So this is coming from all over the place right now, and at one level it's about time, but it's also sad that I think it comes from the fact that whereas students had once been, and I want to stress this.
And this is the third phase that you were talking about.
Students had once been some of our best allies on campus. They got free speech. They understood due process better than faculty members often, certainly better than administrators. And at some point in the past couple of years, we increasingly found ourselves at odds with students who wanted people disinvited, who wanted new speech codes, who wanted another group prosecuted for what it said. And this to me is definitely the most distressing phase of my career yet.
Yeah, and you talk about that in your cover story for The Atlantic, the September issue, The Coddling of the American Mind. What inspired you to write that? And what when did you start seeing these trends?
Well, it's a very personal story. The story behind the Atlantic article. The Atlantic article, which by the way, my preferred title for it was "Arguing Towards Misery." Mm-hmm. That was what I thought the title was going to be for the last.
I did a Google Trends recently and saw the use of the word coddling over the past year, and as soon as your article came up, it just spikes. Yeah. And then you got President Obama using it when he's talking about how students shouldn't be coddled and protected from different points of view.
I've heard some college campuses where they don't want to have a guest speaker who, is too conservative, or they don't want to read a book if it has language that is offensive to African Americans, or somehow sends a demeaning signal towards women. And, I got to tell you, I don't agree with that either. I don't agree that when you become students at colleges, have to be coddled and protected from different points of view.
It's not my favorite way to refer to it. The word coddling does not appear in the article. It's actually very personal how the article came about. I previously hadn't been all that open about this, but I always had issues with anxiety and depression my whole life. Mm-hmm. And I went through a very scary stage. And the thing that got me out of it was cognitive behavioral therapy. And for those of you who don't...
I got to just jump in and say that I am also someone whose life has been improved immeasurably by cognitive behavioral therapy. I am like the biggest devotee, so...
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Look at this. I've known
lifelong anxiety sufferer who, I wish I had discovered it. I mean, I'm finished with it now. The nice thing about CBT is it's a course of therapy. It's not like you start therapy and then you're in it forever. It's like a treatment.
Yeah, you have to remind yourself some of the approaches.
But just absolutely, I agree. It's just life-changing.
It's absolutely amazing. Okay, we've talked a little bit about this, but that's really great to know. But here's what I think is really profound, though, about CBT that people really need to understand. All CBT is getting in the disciplined practice of examining if your automatic thoughts are rational. Mm-hmm. And they have things called cognitive distortions. You say, is this an overgeneralization? Is this dichotomous thinking? Is this catastrophizing? Mm-hmm. And everybody does this. Everybody does this to some degree. Everybody says it's like, if this date goes badly, my life is over. Mm-hmm. We all say this kind of stuff, but for those of us who are a little more anxious or prone to depression, we say it a lot louder and a lot more often. But it's also one of the most successful interventions for depression and anxiety that we have ever come up with, and it involves no drugs. But what's even more profound about it is just the fact that if you think about the tradition it comes from, it's the tradition of Marcus Aurelius. It's the tradition of the old Socratic method of examining your thoughts. It's something that the Buddha could have taught you. Yeah. But just the idea of enlightenment, self-directed enlightenment, self-examination is not only good for our society, it's not only good for production of ideas, but it actually could also be good for happiness. That's profound. Yeah. So while I was learning all this stuff about cognitive behavioral therapy...
And when was this about?
This was about 2007.
Okay.
And as I was learning this, I was seeing case after case coming up where I'm like, we're teaching a generation overgeneralizing. We're teaching them personalization. We're teaching them emotional reasoning, which is essentially if you feel something, that means something has to be wrong. And one of the more interesting ideas in cognitive therapy, which is also true, is that every time you feel bad, it might just be a sensation that's going to pass in a couple of minutes. It might come from nowhere. You might need more glucose. Who knows? Or you might
need to take a nap.
And as I also like to stress, sometimes when you rationally examine your thoughts, and I think this was missed in the article, sometimes you can come to the conclusion, oh yeah, no, I was being rational that time.
Well, and another interesting thing about CBT, and I see it tying into campus stuff, is that from a standpoint of anxiety, one of the big things that they talk about is not seeking reassurance, whether it's from other people or even from yourself, but rather learning to accept the fact that uncertainty exists and learning to live with the discomfort of some uncertainty in your life. And what we see, I feel like, on campus is students, basically constantly seeking reassurance now from these administrations, and getting it because of, I think probably because of a lot of factors, but, one is sort of this increasingly corporate model where, the university is the seller and the student is the buyer. And if what they want is the administration to, be a reassuring parental figure. But anyway, I don't want to cut you off on your thing, but I feel like I see that side of it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, what are campuses doing here to supercharge this sort of irrational thinking?
In the first draft of the Coddling of the American Mind, the one that I after John Haidt had agreed to co-author it with me, I did
social psychologist at NYU,
best-selling author. Yeah. I was over the moon when he agreed to co-author the thing with me because he really liked the idea. But one thing I emphasized...
he thought it was brilliant. I think is a direct quote from him. Don't undersell yourself.
I'm blushing. But the...
Oh, you actually are blushing.
Yeah.
We need to start filming these podcasts.
But the one of the things I emphasized a little bit more was more true throughout most of my career. Because when I really first started thinking about this, I'm like, oh my God, we are teaching a generation of students that, for example, smart people freak out when someone sends around, this is a real example, of course, a picture of their kid doing yoga with a Game of Thrones T-shirt on. Like we demonstrated catastrophizing to a generation of students like it's our job, over and over again, saying, "Oh my God, you're going to get Zika virus. Oh my God, you're going to get kidnapped." When we know all of these things are highly exaggerated in how likely you are to actually experience it. But on campuses, I felt like, wow, catastrophizing we're teaching them almost every day. Certainly emotional reasoning. Certainly the idea that kind of like, if I feel bad, you must be bad.
Yeah.
The dichotomous thinking, either something is just or it's a social evil. All of these sort of like all of these habits that can make people anxious and depressed. I think we've been modeling them in the worst possible way, which is through example. And if you look at administrative case after administrative case at Fire, they involve someone overreacting, over making a bigger deal out of something than it needed to be. And so one of the things that I keep on saying, because people who haven't read Coddling the American Mind, they can be pretty hostile to me on campus.
Yeah, it's a long article.
Yeah, well, and they'll come at me saying, kind of like, oh, you're saying we're coddled and that we're fragile. I'm saying, actually, I'm saying you're not fragile.
You're being treated like you're fragile.
And you're being taught that you're fragile.
Right.
And to sort of paraphrase your father, anyone who tells you you're fragile is not your friend.
Right.
Yeah. And her father being Alan Charles Coors, co-founder of Fire.
And as it becomes, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that what an incredible disservice we're doing to people, doing to these students to say, so I always put it this way. If you had a shrink that put its arms on either side of your shoulder and said, listen, I'm really glad you came to me, but you should know you're very fragile, and if you hear things that hurt you, you're never going to be okay again.
Right.
Would you work with that person, and would that person stay in the profession? And the answer is, of course, no. So meanwhile, I feel like we're actually delivering this sort of positive message about empowerment. But when people have been looking primarily at the title and I think sometimes the graphic that went along with the article without reading the damn thing.
Yeah, and it's sort of within Fire's scope with regard to the strong student model that we always advocate. That being that students aren't these wilting flowers, that they're strong and resilient and they can live with freedom. And that our fathers or our parents or our grandparents in the 1950s and 60s went to college, threw off this idea of in loco parentis, that administrators need to be your parents. And now we have some sort of, in the past we've had administrators who say, who want to step in and police students' lives for them. Now we have some students who are actually going to administrators.
Demanding
that. And, is that a result of this sort of thinking that administrators have taught students over the past decade or so, this idea that they are fragile and that, if there is something wrong with you, you should come to us and we'll try and fix it for you.
Yeah. What do you think, Sam?
Well, I think I see a lot of it kind of coming from the increasing bureaucratization on campus. Because, I mean, these days you really can't, like, sneeze without coming across an administrator. It's gotten to the point where if you look up, I forget what the exact URL is, but it's, university title generator or something. You can automatically generate these titles like dean for campus sensitivity and a fake salary of, $250,000. So, there was a study, and it was I think it ran from like 1993 to 2007. There was an organization that looked at basically the percentage and increase in administrative hires versus, faculty and instructional hires, and found that just on most campuses, the administrative hires is what exploded, while faculty and instructional hiring either sort of stayed the same or sometimes even went down. And so I think that this environment on campus where everything is so heavily bureaucratized, where students and their parents are treated as sort of the consumers, I think that's why you're seeing so much kind of backlash against faculty, too, because I feel like whereas, I don't know, when I was in college, faculty were kind of the authority. I mean, they were the people who, at least as a student, I saw as kind of running the institution. Now it's almost like they're sort of subservient, or treated as subservient to administrations who are the ones looking out for, what is in the best interest of the university as the seller of an education, as and I feel like it's just changed. I see that as a big contributor to the whole shift in dynamic.
Yeah. And I've been doing a lot of reading. I recently had I have a son, Benjamin.
Yes, congratulations.
Who's just about to turn 6 months old, and of course I'm doing what any nerd does in these situations. I've been reading like crazy about it, but I've also been trying to combine my interest in sort of positive psychology with my reading. So, have you read?
Can I plug a book to you then?
I'm going to plug one first.
Get in line.
And I'm proud to say that she's a friend of mine from law school. She was a dean when I was there. Sweetest person ever. And now I realize a total badass. Julie Lifcott-Haynes wrote a book called How to Raise an Adult. And I'm not quite done with it yet, but it is absolutely brilliant. I'm
going to read that.
You absolutely have to. And it's terrifying, too, though, because it talks about because I think that, like all things, I never think something is caused by a single factor. I always think that it's a culmination of several different factors. But some of the stories of what we're doing to this generation of kids, on the one hand, we're not letting them feel empowered, and shock upon shock, disempowered people feel depressed and anxious because we're not letting them do a lot of things for themselves or giving themselves independence. But we're also saying, and by the way, if you don't get into this impossible school, your life is going to be over. And by the way, very few people get into this impossible school. Yeah. And so reading that book, it's just terrible. But it also talks about scare stories, like things that make my heart, beat faster. People about students doing about parents doing their students' homework and all this kind of it's awful. But what were you going to say?
Oh, well, I was going to recommend a book called Parenting with Love and Logic, which is basically the idea behind it. The author's idea is that a lot of teenagers and young adults engage in quite dangerous sort of risk-taking behavior because they have arrived at adolescence and early adulthood without ever being given the opportunity to make decisions for themselves and to experience the consequences of those decisions. So it basically advocates from a very early age. Obviously, it's sort of age appropriate. There are risks you don't let your 3 or 4-year-old take. But if your 3 or 4-year-old says, I'm going out without a coat on, you let them do it. And then you say to them when they complain that they're cold, you say, well, I bet that next time you're going to wear a coat.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's sort of an example that, in age-appropriate ways, you let your kids make decisions for themselves and then experience the real consequences of those decisions.
That's absolutely amazing because my parents weren't around all that much when I was a kid, and to a large degree I was raised more by my older sister and my older brother. And my dad wasn't really around very much, and my mom had to work nights. But she's British-born, and she has all of these practices that as an adult I'm really starting to realize were very bright. And one, she always talked to us like we were adults. And it's adorable when you're talking to a 5-year-old like they're like a little tiny lawyer or accountant.
I have a friend who does that.
Yeah. But we want to do that for Ben too. But the other thing was, it's really cool that you should say that, suffering the natural consequences of your actions is the best teacher.
Yeah. Well, it makes parenting a lot easier because then you don't have to come up with punishments. You just think about, okay, what sort of flows naturally from this?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this is actually a really good segue to what I think is, I think it's safe to say the biggest headline from this past year, which is what happened at Yale.
Yeah.
All starting with a letter from she's assistant master master at Silliman College at Yale University. Erica Christakis, her husband, Nicholas Christakis, was a master of Silliman College. Her letter sort of talked about some of the same things as you guys are discussing, though in the context of Halloween.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the scenario there? I'm assuming that most of our listeners are familiar with the outline.
I do. The Yale case is so radioactive, depending on who you talk to, and people have such strong feelings for it. And being right in the middle of it from the beginning has always been kind of strange. Because I knew both Erica and Nick, because Erica and Nick Christakis used to work at Harvard, and Erica read Unlearning Liberty, wrote an article about empowering students for Time magazine, not disempowering them, and it was an article in favor of student free speech rights against the Harvard administration, and then invited me up to talk to her students at Harvard. So we knew each other from back then.
And Erica's specialty is in early childhood development, right?
And we're gonna plug another book. Yeah. She wrote a book called The Importance of Being Little, which is also very good, and it talks about things like unstructured play and like the ways you let children mature. And from that perspective, it only makes sense that she wrote a letter when the multicultural department sent out a letter saying, be sensitive about what you wear for Halloween, and here's some ideas of what you shouldn't wear.
And here's a list of administrators who approve this message.
And she it's one of these things that what Erica said in that letter has been so badly distorted, in my opinion, that in every single speech I give about this, I say, go read the letter.
And her letter was to Silliman College students.
Silliman College students.
Yeah.
Questioning whether or not it was really Yale's role to be acting in loco parentis, to be telling these people like their children that you can't handle this, and particularly if you read her research and her
or that
work,
they can't police their own norms for how to dress on Halloween.
So it was very much and
it was not at all. There was no substantive defense of offensive costumes. It was all about the role of the university versus the role of adult college students.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's kind of funny because people will talk about, but it's context, and the students who are aggrieved and are angry at her, had other context. I'm like, yes, there's a lot of contextual things that should be added, and one of them is Erica was responding in part to the fact that every single Halloween for years at Fire, we've watched different, often ham-handed attempts to tell students what they can't wear on Halloween.
In some cases, the administration is punishing the students.
Punishing students, and probably and this got it sort of like ceremonial start, I think at Cornell or Syracuse in 2010, where the chief of police warned that students might be punished and told to disrobe. Yeah. And I was like, that's just creepy. And the idea that the chief of police did not get how creepy that sounded, that the co-eds would be asked to disrobe, just absolutely disturbing. So I was invited up to speak on free speech by Erica and Nick Christakis at Silliman College, and I was just there coincidentally to give a lecture that night when I saw the sort of confrontation in the yard at Silliman. And I was watching it, and it was very interesting to watch because it was a couple dozen angry students, many of whom were filming it. The Yale Daily News was there and filmed it.
Yeah.
And they were, really angry about what Eric had done. They chalked her name all over the
courtyard
the ground of Silliman. But one thing I should say about the nature of the confrontation is Nick did a really good job of de-escalating it. From it definitely seemed like it was just anger, but then he tried to make it productive. And there were moments during that where I felt like some real constructive communication was happening. But there are other moments where people were just, demanding he apologize and breaking into tears because he didn't apologize exactly the way one student wanted him to.
Yeah.
And I started recording it because I wanted everybody, and this is why I recorded it. I've been doing this for a really long time. I know what happens in he said, she said situations. And if you can't prove that a professor acted appropriately in one of these high-stress situations, it's often that professor who ends up losing their job.
You seem to think that somehow I don't agree with the content of your beliefs. And that's not what's happening from my perspective. From my perspective.
I don't see you as agreeing. Can I say something? Can I just interject really quickly? The moral of Michaela's comment is now the moral of the story is that she wants an apology, yet you respond not with an apology. That's my question. I'm just saying, can I finish? Are you going to address the heart of her comment? That's all I want. Are you going to give an apology?
I think it's a testament to the foresight that you had, because there were, as you said, a lot of other people taking videos there. The Yale Daily News took videos. Mm-hmm. They put them up online, and then they took them down.
Yeah.
It's funny because people ask me, because they know I work for a free speech organization, they're like, have you seen that video from Yale? I'm like, my boss took that video from Yale.
Yeah. And so, we felt there was a moral responsibility to put it up. And to show that Nick kept his calm during all that. And I will say, one thing I was horrified to discover was that the Daily Caller, and I've no hesitation on calling them out on this, decided to list the name of one of the students who was
dox
yelling.
Them, yeah.
Yeah, to list the name of one of the students who was yelling in Nick's face and give information about her, and that completely wrong. But what I also feel kind of funny about that for another reason is that what had happened right before, that one student who was calling Nick Christakis disgusting and
for the famous portion of that video,
was there another student who had said exactly the same thing, if not more forcefully. So it wasn't just one student participating in this. So I was there. I got this on video. I still got questions like how was it that you were there? I'm like, complete coincidence. I was staying in the Silliman dorms. But I needed people to see that Nick acted.
Because they don't know about the secret free speech bat signal that
goes up and fires immediately on campus with a camera in vertical position.
That Nick was really trying to have a constructive dialogue, and that he did nothing wrong. But nonetheless, given the environment, Erica has said she won't teach there again. I don't know if she'll ever teach there again.
Yeah.
Nick took a sabbatical the next fall. And now both of them have dropped out as masters at Silliman College, because a number of students said they wouldn't be willing to accept a diploma from Nick because of what he did wrong. I still don't entirely understand. So it's a very sad situation kind of for all involved, and I think it's going to be a story that people are talking about for years from now.
Yeah, I mean, would you think that's an example of the catastrophizing that you point to in your article, or is that a different, sort of irrational way of thinking?
Oh, well, I just want, what you said about students not accepting a diploma. Well, I agree that is catastrophizing, and that's something that we see across the board now too. This idea that if you disagree with someone about something, then you must completely disavow them as a person. I mean, we see this happening right now with Alice Drager, who, if you are familiar with Fire's work, she was on our site earlier in the year because she was the editor of a bioethics journal that published a serious piece on the intersection of disability and sexuality that then Northwestern, worried was going to harm its brand. And so they took it down from the website and censored the journal. And Alice, wrote an absolutely heroic resignation letter from Northwestern. But now, she wrote another piece, I guess, several years ago about, teaching children about sex. And, I think the title of the piece was something about why can't we admit to children that sex is primarily about pleasure. And it was going to be reprinted by Everyday Feminism, which is a website, that posts various feminist pieces.
It was printed by them.
Well, briefly.
Yeah.
And then it came out that she had written some other pieces on trans issues that Everyday Feminism disagreed with. So they sent her a letter and said, we're sorry, but we're taking this down because it's come to our attention that you've written these other pieces that we disagree with. Even though we really like this piece and we think it's a valuable contribution. Yeah. So this idea, and it's the same thing. It's like, well, you said something I disagree with, so I can't even accept my diploma from you. Or, well, we disagree with something you said on a completely different topic, so we have to just disavow you entirely as a person and every idea you've ever had. I mean, if that's not catastrophizing, I don't know what is.
What Erica did was academics. I mean, what she said was part of her academic speech. I mean, what she was talking about was completely germane to what she studies, to what she writes about every day, to the things I'm sure she talks with students about. So, I mean, if you're a student, if you're a faculty member, you're probably going to shut up in the future.
When I wrote a summary of what's going on campus, one of the things last January, one thing that I wrote
was for Cato?
Yeah, for Cato. Yeah. Was where's everybody been?
Right.
This has been going on for a really long time. And I even, in recently talking to students, one thing that I said is like, guys, I'm going to apologize to students because I do think it's noteworthy that the horrible abuses of campus free speech and due process have been going on long before students were part of the mix. But the media tended to ignore that. And I'm kind of like, but now that it's an opportunity to sort of like hate on younger students, they're kind of like, well, now we get it. And it's like, oh, come on. Like, where were you 5 years ago? Where were you 10 years ago?
Or 4 years ago?
I think part of the reason, it seemed to me, too, that part of the reason the Yale controversy got the attention it did was that it came right on the heels of the protests at the University of Missouri.
Yep.
And whatever you think about those protesters' conduct, the underlying issues that they were protesting were, their allegations of acts of racism on campus and stuff were very serious. And then you had this Yale situation, which seemed to escalate just as quickly and be just as big a deal to these students. And it was an email from a professor about Halloween costumes. And it sort of seemed like, well, wait a minute, what kind of bubble are these students living in,
But the Missouri situation, the situation at Yale, were part of a larger campus movement across the country against perceived racism on campus. And one of the things that we saw from students on the ground were these sayings that free speech is just a diversion from what they were doing. Right. Greg, do you want to? I know you've spoken a little bit about that, and we, Robert Shibley, who's the executive director here at FIRE, wrote a blog post at the end of last year called "Free Speech Not Just a Diversion from Campus Protests," and he talked about how some of the demands that these students were making, which can be viewed at thedemands.org, involved speech, had many speech components. They were demanding campus speech codes. Not all of them, of course, but some of them. For example, Missouri State University, the protesters demanded a commitment from the administration to differentiate hate speech from freedom of speech, which I anticipate most listeners to this podcast will understand why that's problematic. At Dartmouth College, for example, protesters demanded that the conservative Dartmouth Review give up its Dartmouth name, or the administrators take that name away from them if they continue to use the word Indian in some of their coverage or commentary. So very much, and those are just a few examples. You can read more of them over at the blog post. But those, there's very much, in some cases, a speech component here, right, Greg?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it was funny. That article that you're referring to was written by Jelani Cobb and was called "The Free Speech Diversion." Yeah. At the New Yorker. And what's funny is I have since met and debated Jelani Cobb a couple times. And the first thing I'd like to say, and this is always pleasant to discover, is sometimes when you meet your critics in person, you might actually really like them. And in this case, I think Jelani Cobb's an awesome guy. Like he's a hard dude not to like. Even when he's insulting my opinion, I still like the guy. But we just have to marshal out example after example. It's like, no, this is not a diversion. Unfortunately, some of these students are demanding new speech codes. They're demanding control of the curriculum. They're demanding sort of ideological conformity. And that wasn't all the students, but some of them were. So the idea that free speech had nothing to do with it is sort of a favorite talking point that still gets recycled and refers to that article. Meanwhile, when Jelani and I debated at Vanderbilt, for example, we agreed on 9 out of 10 things. We did like the main things we were agreeing on were interpretations of facts or understanding of facts in different cases. That was about it. But it does kind of show how we have these different islands and echo chambers in the country that only talk to each other. Yeah. Because when if I talk in more libertarian circles, it's kind of assumed that everybody knows all the same things. In conservative circles, it turns out there's things that I don't know that everybody's supposed to know. And in more liberal circles, different memes keep going. And the idea that free speech had nothing to do with it is something that I still run into. And I have to say, it's like, no, these were constant examples of students demanding new speech codes, and people got fired for it. People's jobs were threatened over it. But what's interesting about this, and the thing that I always have to do, and to give larger context, is one, students had always been on our side. When it came to free speech, not necessarily all of them, but a lot of them. Students tend to get it, and particularly when I would go speak on campus, particularly minority students. They knew the history of the civil rights movement. They knew the history of all the civil rights movement up to the gay rights movement, and understood how important free speech was for that. So what exactly happened last fall, I'm still not entirely clear on.
Yeah, well, I remember when I started at FIRE, Greg, I was your assistant, of course, and we were doing publicity for your book on learning liberty, which is very much about administrative censorship. This whole freedom from speech movement, the microaggression policing, the trigger warning demands, the disinvitations on campus, I mean, this this wasn't on our radar.
No, yeah, and I wrote a short book, and I'm glad my initial response to writing that short broadside called Freedom from Speech was something to the effect of, hell no, I don't have the time. And I'm really glad I took the time to write it because it was only 9,000 words, only about as long as the Atlantic article. But it was my opportunity to talk about the shift we'd seen. Yeah. And I mark the historic moment of – because we were having a sense within Fire that other than the Department of Education, that a lot of these things were kind of improving. A sense that we would get every so often at Fire. We'd have these little bouts. I remember in 2006 having a little bit like, okay, maybe things are improving. But I've learned to sort of dread that feeling.
2007 was a terrible year.
2007 was a terrible year.
And then before 2011, there were a few more years where I mean, a lot of the cases that we were getting, it seemed like the issues were more subtle,
or more like purely bureaucratic.
Right,
where it was just
security fees, things like that.
Yeah.
And then it was like,
boom. Yeah. And so it seems like every time we think the coast is clear, we're like, oh no. Yeah. And the moment when we really noticed that I think of the symbolic moment that clued us into something had changed was Ray Kelly being shouted down at Brown.
Yes.
Now we're civil liberties people, so even though Fire is politically very different, we come from all different sort of political backgrounds. We all believe in civil liberties, so I don't think many of us feel all that great about some of Ray Kelly's stop and frisk background and that kind of stuff.
Ray Kelly was a police commissioner in New York City, right?
Yeah. And the reason why civil libertarians don't like him is because he was considered the father of stop and frisk, which civil libertarians really don't like as an idea. So I understand why students were unhappy that he was invited, but the attitude, as far as I'm concerned, should be, well, let's hear him out. And what was really incredible about the situation at Brown was that the students who were trying to get him disinvited instead got him to agree to an hour of question and answer. So if you really wanted to give Ray Kelly a piece of your mind or ask him a hard question, he was saying, come ask me a hard question. But that wasn't good enough for some of the students there. And they shouted him down so badly that the speech couldn't go on. And we've seen incidents like this in Fire history. But this one seemed much larger scale. And then we knew something was kind of different when the president lamented that this is the first time anyone's ever been chased off Brown's campus, and students cheered.
Yeah.
No justice, no peace, no racist police. Islamophobic, thanks to Ray, NYPD, go away.
I want to speak to you about the role of proactive policing and the role it's played in keeping New York City safe in our post 9/11 environment.
How long is too long?
Well, I've been coming to lectures here since 1977, and I've never seen this happen before. I was looking forward to hearing what the commissioner had to say.
And from that moment on, we noticed incident after incident after incident of students recommending illiberalism, recommending that the speaker can't speak here.
Yeah, we see that with this invitation season, which often is it's commencement season, but speakers are invited to campus. Students or faculty members, in some cases, don't like some of the views that those speakers might hold, and they work to get them disinvited from their commencement address. We saw that with John Brennan this year, right, at the University of Pennsylvania. I think he only got to speak for I don't know that it was a commencement address, but I think he only got to speak for 15 minutes before John Brennan, the current CIA director of the CIA, 15 minutes before he left. But
the one that really got to me this year, because it was just the most, it was the most blatant display of this attitude that I've probably ever seen, was the disinvitation at Williams, where there is a student group at Williams.
Uncomfortable Learning,
founded by a liberal African-American student for the express purpose of bringing, controversial viewpoints to campus. And one of the controversial viewpoints that he invited was John Derbyshire, who is a former writer for National Review, who had written a piece that, a lot of people decried as racist, and that I think actually led to his firing from the National Review. This student, Zach Wood, and his group invited him to campus, and the president of Williams unilaterally stepped in and said, no, I will not allow, I'm going to act in the best interest of our students here and not allow this viewpoint on campus. And Zach Wood said, well, that's a shame because, I wanted to bring him here to force him to confront intelligent people who were going to question his premises. And, I was looking forward to taking him down a peg. And, here you have this paternalistic administrator stepping in and saying, well, I'm sorry, I know what's best for you.
Yeah.
We're not going to let this person speak. And to me, that was the most sort of naked display of this kind of paternalism, which is, it's behind, I think, all of these disinvitations, but you rarely see it, so exposed like that.
Yeah, and Fire keeps a database of these attempts, a disinvitation database, and as of May 5th, we had 18 attempts on campus. I think 11 of them were successful, including the John Derbyshire one. But we're running out of time here. But before we close up the discussion of this campus protest this year, I think it's important noting, right, that even if students are calling for censorship or calling for speech codes, if an administrator was to step in and punish them for calling for those speech codes, Fire would step in and defend their right, right? It's just a unique position that you're in when you're a civil libertarian.
It was really really funny when I made the argument, when I explained in a debate at Cato with Eric Posner that students have the right to demand freedom from speech and the right to demand speech codes, just we also think they're wrong. But we'll defend the right to be wrong.
Yeah, and that's what we said in our statement on the protest.
And which was what was funny was Eric Posner was like, oh, that's just ridiculous. And I'm like, no, it isn't. Like, of course you have the free speech right to question the First Amendment. That's what you're doing. That's what your whole career is, Eric Posner, for goodness sakes.
Right, the problem is that unlike other demands that we would consider ridiculous, like a demand for discrimination or something like that, when students demand freedom from speech, administrators take it seriously. And that's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And, what I hope to do, and just to reach out, and it's kind of funny because I sometimes joke that I have this sort of mean genie granting my wishes because and he or she will grant it only in a very technical sense. And I wanted I was depressed about the apathy among students for such a long time. And I got to say, like on one level, sort of like the activism of the last year has definitely convinced me that apathy, the problem of apathy, maybe at least for now, a thing of the past.
Yeah.
What I found unfortunate, though, is sometimes when that activism is devoted towards, shrinking the marketplace of ideas, then I think it's just completely wrong-headed. But there are so many things to be worked up about these days all over the world, and on campuses, everything from cost to the way things are run, to just the weird sort of isolation that it creates from other people. But the idea that the solution to the problems of higher education are going to be hire more administrators, sorry, that's just not going to...
Which is what you're getting in some of these demands that students are making.
It's not going to work.
No, I think Fire's career, Fire's since our founding, has borne that out. But before we finish up here, I want to ask both of you. This year sort of took us by surprise in a way. To the extent that it's possible, what do you guys think we'll see in the next school year, the 2016-2017 school year? Sam, I know that we've had a decline in the red light speech codes that colleges, from our Spotlight database. But that doesn't mean the threat's gone away. We still have many colleges that have yellow light speech codes. I think only 5% or so maintain green light speech codes or green light schools. So what are you anticipating moving into the next year for policy reform?
Well, we do still have a challenge, a major speech code challenge. In addition to the almost 50% of schools that have red light policies, another 40-some% have yellow light policies, which, while they may not be as restrictive as the red light policies, are still, overwhelmingly unconstitutional. And we also are seeing a real rise in bias incident reporting policies, which are sort of an interesting kind of policy that frequently, while some of them prohibit speech outright, often they kind of operate in this gray area where they may not be outright prohibiting speech, but they are actively encouraging students to report on one another for any speech that they may find offensive, which to me, a climate, a big brother climate like that, where students are constantly being encouraged to, report on one another to the administration, while it may not outright violates free speech, I don't think it's very conducive to a climate where students are able to have free and open discussions.
Yeah,
and honestly, I know this sounds so cliche, but those kind of free and open discussions are really important. When I think back to some of the most important learning I did in college, it was, in late night conversations with classmates of different backgrounds and things like that. So I think that by sort of chilling those kinds of discussions through this fear of
if you see something, say something.
Exactly.
Sort of protocol.
I think that we're really depriving students of some of their best learning opportunities on campus.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I feel like by nature I'm optimistic about things, just in a Russian sense. I think that my village probably won't be destroyed. I think kind of like like the worst things that could happen in history.
Well, there were some
probably won't
successes
happen.
this year. We got some universities adopting the Chicago Statement, which
Right.
is their glowing statement in support of free speech. We did have a decline in the red light speech codes, but
But I was going to come to a big but.
I was anticipating the but.
But I think things are going to get a lot worse, and I think what's going to be worse is the media is going to get tired of covering it. They're going to take it increase, and because I think that one of the problems we had with some of our really outrageous cases, even as we said back in 2007, 2004, was a perception in the media that this issue was covered a lot. And I had feel like banging my head against the wall. I'm like, when was the last time this was on network news? And in the last year, sometimes it has been covered on network news because the cases have gotten just so bad. But it's amazing how quickly the media can adapt. Now, of course, then you've got the real wild card of what ends up happening in the election.
Yeah.
Depending on who's elected, I can imagine serious protests on campus.
Yeah, and then one thing that's sorry to jump in here, but one thing that is
absolutely.
fascinating, and that I think it'll be really fascinating to see how it plays out, is that because of the strong feelings engendered by Donald Trump's candidacy, and because of the association of his name with viewpoints that many people view as racist and sexist, we're getting a lot of cases and situations where the mere chalking of his name, the mere campaign slogan Trump 2016 is itself being treated as perhaps impermissible speech. And so I'll be fascinated to see how that plays out in the upcoming election cycle.
Yeah, I mean, my optimistic side hopes that people will start to understand because that they can be censored too, and this might lead to their appreciating freedom of speech again. But I don't see a lot of signs of that, and I do see instead, the meet speech with more speech attitude is going more with the European model of silence opinions that you dislike.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time to chat with me. Greg, for coming down from D.C. We're here for a staff retreat this week, which is fun. It's always nice to see people from the two offices or the remote employees all together. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I'm working on what I hope will be a really special show for you all on June 30th. And speaking of future shows, you can call in questions at 215-315-0100, and we might just play those questions during future episodes, 215-315-0100. And before we go here, I just want to give people the opportunity to jot down the names of those books that you all had recommended.
Sure.
Again, Greg and Sam. What was the book that you recommended, Greg?
Julie Lithcott-Haynes' book, How to Be an Adult, I highly recommend. And I also recommend Erica Christakis' The Importance of Being Little.
Yep. And Sam?
That was Parenting with Love and Logic by Foster Klein and Jim Fay.
For So to Speak, this podcast is hosted by me, Nico Perino, and recorded and edited by Aaron Reese and Chris Maltby. You can learn more about the show at our Twitter account, twitter.com/freespeechtalk, or by liking us on Facebook at facebook.com/So to Speak podcast. Again, that's facebook.com/So to Speak podcast. You can also email us at sotospeak@thefire.org. We're always happy to get listener feedback and entertain ideas for future shows. Thanks for listening.